The Almighty, I pray to the Almighty, bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and so we sanctify His name and bring peace to the world. Amen. Firstly, I would like to thank the sponsors, the ones who brought this to fruition, the Muslims for Liberty, for making this happen, and also, of course, my friend, Mr. Ashraf Nubani, Esquire, for arranging it, and the moderator, Dr. Ahmed, who were old colleagues, old friends. And I also know that I'm sure that it took a lot of courage for McLean High School to allow this to happen, so I'm thanking the board and so forth who allowed this to happen. I really thank them. And again, the purpose is to sanctify God's name, to bring peace. We ask, of course, everybody that they should pray to the Almighty to open their hearts and minds, to be able to listen. The decisions, they should be able to have an open for the truth, because many times people have a preconception, they have something that they've been taught, and many times what they are taught is embedded, and it really sometimes doesn't allow, because of fear, because of subconsciously afraid that you may come to a decision that will make your life uncomfortable and so forth, and therefore you start thinking with a slanted view. Or if somebody talks, you start thinking, looking for some faults in the presentation. You start, whatever you can to be able to somehow dismiss what is being said. So I ask everybody to pray to the Almighty that we should open our hearts, our minds, to look for the truth, and that we should be able to reach the truth. And once that is reached with God's help, to spread it throughout the world, and God should help it should be spread throughout the world. The issue, of course, is very contentious. We're talking here about the existence of an entity called the State of Israel, and how legitimate it is, whether it should be supported by the United States, and the people of Palestine, how they should be supported, what is their legitimacy. There's two distinct sides to this issue, and people understand, as a general given, that we're talking here about a religious conflict, that we're talking here about some old, embedded, ingrained conflict and differences between Jews and Muslims, Jews maybe and Arabs, because there's Christian Arabs, but mostly Muslim Arabs, and the only question that we have left to us is how we could coexist, and how these two mountains could come together. But as Dr. Ahmed said, really in truth, this is a new phenomenon. The fact is that Jewish people lived in Palestine, in the Holy Land, for hundreds of years. There was no United Nations, there were no human rights groups. Jews lived amongst people who had their guns to protect them. The neighbors had every type of weapon that was available at that time in their homes. There were warring tribes, there were different cultures in the Arab world. It was like they say, the Wild West in certain areas. And yet the Jewish people lived amongst the Arab world and amongst the Muslim world for hundreds of years. They flourished in this world. In fact, when Jewish people went through very, very hard trials and tribulations, the Crusades, the Inquisition, and many, many more times like that, there were blood libels, different times, and the Jewish people had open doors and were able to go to Arab and Muslim countries. They were embraced, they were graciously taken in, and they created Jewish communities. the remnants of that. You can see the synagogues, the cemeteries from many, many different periods. Were there any bumps in the road through those periods? Yes, there was. But they were certainly flourishing, growing, and creating Jewish communities for all these hundreds of years, and there was no laws, there was no concept that you couldn't be a Jew, that you couldn't be a religious Jew, that you couldn't practice your religion. Our greatest leaders came from these Arab and Muslim countries. And as is the custom, as is the way of the Arab and Muslim people, the concept of hospitality was exemplary. And again, I stress, the Jewish communities flourished. Our greatest leaders came from these countries. As an aside, my wife's great-grandfather 14 generations ago was buried in Istanbul. His name was Rabbi Katz of blessed memory. Very holy rabbi. People go to his grave to pray that he should pray for us 14 generations ago. And cemeteries exist there in Istanbul. I was there. I was in many other, with God's help, many other countries. You can see these cemeteries of tens and not tens, but hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who came from, who were in those communities. Synagogues, many of them, unfortunately, today aren't in use. But that is because of this issue that we're going to touch on now, that we're going to speak about, Zionism. And again, I have to pray to the Almighty. I'm a little bit of a long-winded speaker, and also the issue is so complicated. It's such a painful issue. It really requires a lot more than half an hour to talk about it. But what we're doing is simply trying to open a window, shed a little light, giving people the opportunity to look further into the issue. I'd just like to make a few corrections. First of all, Neturei Karta, I'm from New York, but Neturei Karta was actually created in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem. And as Dr. Ahmed correctly said, there was, the community was almost entirely, in fact, I bring a lot of times documents with me. This is called Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism, the historic documents. And we have the general from, German general wrote a book. It was written about in Haaretz, a Zionist paper, and he writes that there was 95% of the Jewish community by World War I were anti-Zionist, and they were terrorized by that 5%. These are the facts it was called, the book was called Turks and Germans in Sinai. Mit den Türken zum Suez Canal, made by Friedrich Kress van Krestenstein. And in a book review in Haaretz, they wrote, and I'll just quote one paragraph, that it is interesting to note how Palestine of 90 years ago appeared to Kress. A phenomenon that was extremely odd was how the war, World War I, caused an unprecedented upsurge in the battle between Zionists and non-Zionists. A battle that turned ugly and did little to promote Jewish interests in general. At the same time, the non-Zionists, that is, the Jews without political goals, mainly belonging to the Orthodox stream, were the overwhelming majority in Palestine. The Zionists living in Palestine scarcely made up 5% of the population, but they were very active and fanatical and terrorized the non-Zionists. During the war, the latter, that is the non-Zionists, tried to free themselves from this terror with the help of the Turks. They feared justifiably that the activities of the Zionists would ruin the good relations that existed between the long-time Jewish inhabitants of Palestine and the Arabs, and that the Turks might adopt hardline policies that would harm them too. We have a letter I have, again in these documents, is a memorandum that was given by Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. He was the chief rabbi of Palestine, a very holy man. Now, when I speak about the rabbinate, chief rabbi, I'm not referring to the Israeli rabbinate or their chief rabbis, which was, we believe, which was created by the state of Israel as a facade to give a religious facade to their state of Israel. But there is and there was, and today there is a rabbinate that was in the Holy Land, that ruled, that was the representation of the Jewish people. And this is distinctly separate and have nothing to do with the state of Israel. In fact, because we do not recognize the legitimacy of the state of Israel, this rabbinate goes on. And the chief rabbi in 1924, way before the state of Israel, his name was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld of blessed memory. He was a very holy man, and everybody can Google and look up and see. He was the representative of the Jewish community. He with the King Hussein of the Hejaz. He was the grandfather of King Abdullah of Jordan. He was the king at that time of Transjordan. And he gave him over a memorandum, one of the few that they gave over. And he wrote, "In the name of God, the High Lord, the Creator of heaven and earth, we feel honored to stand before His Majesty and representatives of the World Jewish Organization, Yisroel, and Neturei, this God-fearing community in the holy city of Jerusalem, organized under the leadership of the Vad Ha'ir, that is of the committee of the city of the Ashkenazic Jewish community. This organization of World Orthodox Jewry, which counts approximately 1 million registered members, and it speaks for an even greater number of Orthodox Jews who, although not registered with our organization, are wholeheartedly sympathetic with its goal to guard and preserve the traditional character of the Jewish people and its Torah." He goes on and on, so it's a little bit long again, I have to condense and speak, but he says here, "We assure His Majesty that the Jewish population relates to their neighbors with brotherly harmony wherever they exist. And we will adhere to that tradition in full. We will cooperate with all the inhabitants in building and prospering of the land for a blessing and peace with all." They speak about, he goes on with the other letter saying that we do not want any part of the holy temple, that area. This is given in the second letter that he gave to the Honorable Muslim Congress of Jerusalem. The Congress will deal with the question of Islamic holy sites in the Holy Land. In regard to this, it is important to us to declare before all those gathered and before all of the Muslim world that Jews have no intention to challenge the rights of Muslims to the holy sites or even to demand any rights to these places, just as we do not want others to challenge our rights to sites holy to us. We completely deny any suspicion that we want to demand rights to your holy site that is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the other holy sites located on the Temple Mount compound. It goes on and on. He passed away. Then there was another chief rabbi whose name is Rabbi Dushinsky. Rabbi Dushinsky was the chief rabbi in 1948. And in 1947, there was a delegation from the United Nations that came to the rabbis and to the communities and were trying to feel out what is the will of the communities. So they became aware, the Jewish community, as they saw what was happening, that it was imminent in the creation of a so-called Jewish state. So Rabbi Dushinsky, Yosef Tzvi Dushinsky of blessed memory, approached the United Nations, and in a declaration for the United Nations on July 16, 1947, again I'll just quote one sentence of it, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." This was Rabbi Dushinsky. He was the chief rabbi of the Jewish community of Palestine. 4 months later, November 18, 1947, there's almost to the day today, Rabbi Dushinsky sent a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations of Lake Success. He saw that they were being totally ignored by the United Nations, and they were going to ratify a state of Israel. So he said this memorandum: "The Jewish Orthodox community, Neturei, which means God-fearing community of Jerusalem, comprising 60,000 souls, objects to the plea of including Jerusalem in the Jewish state and/or its residents becoming automatically citizens of the Jewish state. Our community demands that Jerusalem be an international zone under your protection with full autonomy, and its residents be free citizens of the international zone of Jerusalem. We beg of you not to take any action before receiving our memorandum, Chief Rabbi Joseph Bashinsky, in the name of the Ashkenazi community. Now, I just wanted to have you understand that when I'm standing here, I'm from New York. What we're representing here is the basic Jewish view, the basic Jewish law of what Judaism is and what, if it is or not legitimate, the state of Israel. According to the Jewish law, the state of Israel is totally not a legitimate entity, because there's a reason for this. It's very simple. If people believe that the Almighty rules the world, and they believe in the Torah, in the Bible, and in the Jewish history, then we know that the Almighty sent us in exile with the destruction of the King Solomon's temple. And we will put, there's a prophecy of King Solomon. We will put on the oath by God, which is the prophecy of King Solomon in Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. We will put on the 3 oaths. 1, we should not return en masse to the Holy Land. Secondly, we should not rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we're residing. And thirdly, we should not make any attempt to end exile. Why? Because the concept of these oaths is that we accept that the Almighty rules every human being, the Almighty rules the whole universe. And anything that happens, whether it's a blade of grass that grows, or a human being is born or dies, everything is God's will. Yes, somebody commits a crime. Yes, a drunk drives over somebody, he'll be punished. But if it wouldn't have been God's will for this human being who was killed, he wouldn't have been killed. It's only because it was a decree of God. We believe that totally. God forbid if somebody passes away, a close relatives have to make a blessing. Blessed are you, God, Dayan Ha'emes, the righteous judge. That is the Jewish way of thinking. Everything good and everything bad is only through the hands of God. The concept of exile was because, as anybody who reads the works of the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, all the prophets, they're replete. You can see that the Jews were warned while they were enjoying living in the Holy Land, serving God by the temple, King Solomon's temple, but they were constantly being warned that they're not remaining on this high level of holiness, and that therefore they'll be expelled. That eventually came about with the destruction of the temple. And when that came about, God said there's one thing that we have to do, and one thing only. We have to serve God as we made our commitment to God, that we made our bond, that we made with God on Mount Sinai, that we accepted that we will be subservient to God and keep the law of the 613 commandments of the Torah. We have to do that. That is what our obligation is. We try to, our purpose in life is to bring glory to the Almighty through our lives. Ultimately, the pinnacle of this glory will be when the whole world will recognize the one God. But through our life now in exile, every Jewish person understands and teaches his children that the purpose of us here is not to become a doctor, not to become a lawyer, not to become a scientist. The purpose is to serve God, to be close to the Almighty. Yes, you have to serve God, you have to at the same time have a way of being able to study the Torah. You have to do other things, bring refuah, bring medical aid and assistance to people. You have to do all but that is not the purpose of life for some type of materialistic gain. It's to serve God with our whole being, and that is what we strive in our life. So therefore, when God came and God saw that we were not on this high level of holiness, He said that we will be sent into exile. And when that happened, He said, you can't just turn around, pick yourself up, and say, okay, I had it enough. I don't want exile anymore, and I will return when I want. It doesn't work that way. It's God's world. So God said and warned us, do not become impatient with this godly decreed exile. Do not attempt to pick yourself up and return when you want. God foresaw there would be people like this. He said, therefore, what you have to do, you have to be patient, do not return en masse, do not rebel against the nations, be loyal citizens in every country we reside in. Jews accepted this decree of God. For 2,000 years, we were patient, we respect the will of God. It's like a bitter medicine. A father takes his child who was very naughty and he puts him in a corner. And the kid, he says, remain there for 10 minutes. The child runs away after 2 minutes. He says, no, I'm not going to be good. And he does a bad thing again. The father puts him again in the corner. Every 5 minutes he comes and he just says, I'm going to be good. He doesn't want to obey the father. He's not doing the will of his father because he says, I'm running back to you. He's disobeying. The concept of saying that we're going to leave exile, that we're going to come close now, is disobeying the words, the commandment of the Almighty. Zionism came along. Let me just add one more thing. So the concept, for 2,000 years, we had great leaders. We had Maimonides. We had all the great leaders of Judaism. We have a book called The Rabbis Speak Out. This is just 130 years of the leading rabbis that oppose Zionism. But for 2,000 years, all the leaders of Judaism, as I mentioned, Rabbi Sonnenfeld, it's a given. We are in exile, not because we were lacking in military might, not because we were lacking in an army. We were lacking in the closeness to God. And God told us the one way to be able to end this exile and to bring the pinnacle of our purpose of life to glorify the Almighty is by serving Him, being good, emulating God. Just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. By serving the Almighty properly, then God, with His compassion, the minute the time will be right, He will end exile. What does that mean? The end of exile is very clear in our teaching. It means that God, without any human intervention, will make a miracle with all humanity. Every single one. One day we will wake up and there will not be any more atheists. And all humanity, we said that all humanity, as we say in our prayers, will join arms. We will all go up and serve the Almighty as a people, as a nation. But it will be the will of all humanity together. If I have to stand with a gun and tell somebody, give me this piece of property, that proves that it is false and it is against the decree of exile. Jews respected this for 2,000 years. Zionism came about a mere 100-odd years ago, mostly by non-religious Jews. Theodor Herzl, Ben Gurion, and all the other their cohorts, and they wanted to make a transformation of this Judaism that I've spoken about, this covenant that we have with God. They wanted to transform this subservience to God, religion, into a base nationalism. And they had a nationalistic goal, to have an army, have a piece of land. They wanted to go to Uganda, other lands, because they detested the religion. They weren't looking for Palestine, but they understood for practical purposes, in order to be able to glean support from the Jewish community and from the Christian community, they have to have a bigger dream, a bigger reason to be able to create a land and get support. So they turned to Palestine, and they took the story of the Torah and the narrative of the Torah, and they say, look, God gave the children of Israel the Holy Land, and they counted on the ignorance of the masses, and they ignored totally all the works of the prophets and how the Jewish leadership, how they respected and waited patiently in exile for 2,000 years. And they turned around and they said, this is the land that God promised to us. We're returning to this land. The hypocrisy is beyond belief, because they don't keep the Sabbath, they don't keep the 10 Commandments, they do not respect. We have pictures on how they brutally beat. You can look at our site, NKUSA, and links. You'll see how they brutally beat, since their existence, brutally beat the Jewish people because they're standing up. We're not armed, we're never militant. And they brutally beat the Jewish people because they do not want to accept it. They're going out, they're demonstrating against the state of Israel. They've assassinated tens and hundreds of our leaders. Whoever was very outspoken against Zionism was assassinated. From when I spoke about Rabbi Sonnenfeld, the one who arranged the meeting with the king of Transjordan, together with Rabbi Sonnenfeld, his name was Dr. Dahan. In 1924, he was assassinated by the Haganah in the records. Why? Because he arranged the meeting of the Rabbi Sonnenfeld that his voice should be heard. This is what Zionism is. It has nothing, it is diametrically opposite, it has nothing to do. It clashes what it means to be a Jew. A Jew is subservience to God. Zionism is freeing oneself from the yoke of the Almighty. Created, if anybody just wants to look for the truth, they will see that invariably, around the world, if you go to New York, right across from Manhattan is Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, the most concentrated religious Jewish area. There's not one Israeli flag. Is it because they're not Jews who are given over to their religion? These people give their lives. They have large families. They eat only kosher. They have all the trappings of religious Jews from their private schooling because they want it to be a proper Jewish education. They're poor people in the majority. You go to Jerusalem, you'll find the same thing, and you go to London, in Stamford Hills in London. Invariably, the more the religious, the more dedicated to their religion, the more anti-Zionist. Why is that? So if you're going to vilify me, I'm not saying anybody here will do that, but if you're going to look, why is it that the ones who are dedicated to the religion and to emulate God, just as God is compassionate, to be compassionate, they have all these charity organizations and so forth, why is it that the more the religious, the more they are anti-Zionist? The answer is very simple. Because Judaism and Zionism is diametrically opposite. It is forbidden for us to have even 1 inch of Jewish sovereignty since the destruction of the temple. And because I have very few minutes, I'm embarrassed for this, that I didn't get the opportunity to take it a step further, which is then they say the elephant in the room. It's so simple. Judaism says you're not allowed to kill, you're not allowed to steal. The basics of Judaism, and added onto that, one has to show gratitude for good done for them. The Muslim people in Palestine lived in the same courtyards of the Jewish people. We have people today who still can testify to this. We lived together. We were friends. To go and steal persons' property, to expel them, to oppress them, flies in the face of what it means to be Jewish. Thou shalt not steal, all the rules of the Torah. And as I mentioned, the Arab and Muslim countries was a safe haven for the Jews. How dare we stand up and say that there's an ingrained hate to the Jews when they provided for us, they embraced the Jewish people. So in every facet, Zionism turns Judaism on its head, and it's antithetical to what it means, Judaism. Yet, they have the mic in the hand. I have to give up the mic in 2-3 minutes now, but the Zionists have enjoyed the mic for well over 60 years. They use the concept of the Holocaust, which maybe we'll be able to later touch on, but they use the sympathy of the people, that they sympathize and they feel for the Jewish people suffering, and they abuse it, they misuse it. My grandparents died in Auschwitz, as almost all my communities where I grew up in. My father escaped with God's help, and all our people come from that. But they died as Jews, and our parents are proud to continue being Jews and observing the Torah. Not to say because we was God by the Holocaust, as the Zionist mantra is, or that we were weak, now we're going to protect ourselves. In their words, it's rooted in blasphemy. They say, we was God to protect us, now we have to take a gun to protect us, and ignore that the Torah says that you should not attempt to leave exile, except we have to understand, we have to be introspective, but don't say, therefore I'm not going to observe the Torah, and use the concept of the Holocaust and that people, the guilt ride, that people were silent by the Holocaust, therefore they're going to support us to take this land of Palestine, and that they waive the Torah as a deed to the land, when in truth they know, as we, or any Jewish person who knows his Torah knows, that we are forbidden to steal and kill. We are forbidden to have this land, and we can live in peace and harmony, as we've had for hundreds of years. If you remove, not a religion, not a people, you don't have to, the solution is here, not that you have to break your head and create a wall, or create this, or make fences, or whatever, checkpoints, all these terrible things that are happening that just incites and brings more, because if you oppress the people long enough, like they say, Gaza is an open prison. You oppress the reaction, we're not condoning violence, but the reaction is automatic. What would happen in America if you took a state from the United States? What would be the reaction? And here, the solution is there was something added to this picture. There were Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together for hundreds of years without human rights groups to protect us. It was not necessary. Something was added. The religions didn't change. They added a philosophy, an ideology called Zionism, which is nationalism. It should be a Jewish state, even though the majority of people were Muslim and so forth. And they threw this into the equations, like you take an Alka-Seltzer and you put it into a glass of water, it bubbles. You put a grain into an eye. Remove the impediment to peace. God help peacefully and speedily. Then we can once again live in peace. And why? Why is it that we as Jews who are true to our Torah and study our Torah have to be preached to and told that no, Israel is the right thing, and that the leaders of the state of Israel who do not keep the Sabbath, the Ten Commandments, say that we are the guardians of the Jewish religion and the Jewish people, supposedly. What nerve, what audacity. Our great leaders, the tens and hundreds of thousands, and the people who give their lives and who are alive today, who speak up and say, Judaism is subservience to God. Judaism means peace. Judaism wants to show our gratitude to the Muslims and Arab people and to return to the Palestinians. We cry for the suffering of the Palestinian people. It's happening in our name. But let you know, our identity has been hijacked. It's not right. It's not fair what is being done in our name. We cry with the suffering of the Palestinian people. There should be returned entirely the right of self-rule, of respect, their land. And then we will once again, you will see, this mirage will pass and everybody will turn around and say, what a ridiculous issue this was. Why then they can live together in peace? History attests. We'll respect history. We live together. We will live together with God's help in the future. God should help this happen soon in our days, and peace and harmony. Thank you.